profound thank you to you for having me this morning. A thank you to Martha for welcoming me and being part of our ministry together, and Scott also. I hope today, in a few minutes, to accomplish this. I would like you to get to know me a little bit. I'd like you to get to know a bit about spiritual formation, which is the area of ministry that we're going to be embarking on together. And I'd like you to know a little bit about how we're going to actually do that. So, can I do that all in a short period? Let's see what I can do. I should say, this is also the parish of my aunt, Vivian. And so I am delighted to be here and part of her community. So I know a little bit something different to do right now, and I hope it doesn't frustrate you. If you can say I'm new here and give me a wide berth, okay? Here's what I'd like you to do. Think for a minute. When you come to church, which many of you have for many, many years, what in the service draws you closer to God? Is it the music, the prayers, the Eucharist, the sermon? Guess that depends, doesn't it? The readings, the peace? Maybe it's just coming into the space. Maybe it's the community after, or the sending out. So I'm just going to take a second. Now I want you to do one more other thing for me. Turn to the person next to you and tell them what that part of the service is where you feel closest to God. Go. Prayers are wonderful. I like when I reach out. How about you?
Community.
The community. Okay, I'm going to stop your wonderful conversations. That's not very nice of me, is it? They're just getting going. I would love to see if there's any people here who would like to be courageous enough to tell me what part of the service they get a sense of God's closeness. Vivian. Martha's sermons. Woo-hoo, Martha. Why am I preaching? Anybody else? Yes. The Eucharist. I find just that reaching out, like we don't do that in life. That's a huge vulnerability, isn't it? Just to say, I've come asking, right? Yes. Yes. The music. What an amazing choir you have here. Oh my goodness. I have Welsh background. I think you must be all Welsh, because it sounds so good. Yeah, you're very, very lucky here. The music is wonderful. The community. And what an amazing gift to be part of this community. Now, if I asked every person here, I bet you'd have something a little bit different to say about this, because I think in so many ways, God speaks to us differently, depending on who we are, the gifts we bring. Okay, I'm going to get back to this in just a second. Me. So that you know a bit about me. When I was 8, my father died in a car accident, very, very suddenly. And one night, 3 little girls went to bed, and then the parents who went out that evening my father never came back, and my mom was in hospital recovering for quite a while. In so many ways, we all have our own stories, but those things like that that are in our lives, they shape and form us, don't they? Spiritually, as much as emotionally. And so I think because of that, at some unconscious level, I thought, not like a little 8-year-old child, but if I could actually describe what I functioned like, it was more like a warrior. A warrior for an incompetent God. Now, I didn't think this through. It was all unconscious, but I think I thought at some level, what kind of God would leave 3 little girls alone? So I better work really hard for this God because God's not doing a very good job. And so at the tender age of 8, I became a masterful doer. I volunteered into so many things. I was the leader in the class, and I got busy because who was going to make sure everything got done and was taken care of, right? Well, that's what was forming within me. And what I think I discovered later is that the Anglican Church, therefore, fit perfectly for me because I wasn't asked to get close to God. I didn't really know what that was all about. I was asked to do things, and I did them, along with many others. Got busy and did wonderful things. And I still think our extension of showing God's love to the world is extremely important, but that was my primary focus. Well, what happens, like with all of us, at some point or another, there's a crisis. It's either health or it's vocation, or something happens in our jobs, something happens in our families, and all of a sudden, the constructs that we have in place around our faith don't work anymore. And I came to terms immediately with the fact that I either had to walk away from this faith because it was killing me, or I had to re-engage with God in a very different, deeper, and more meaningful way. And so at that very same time as I went through my little crisis, my husband and I received notice that we were going to be able to adopt a little girl. And that just added to all the change that was going to come into our lives. And so I changed my job, we moved, and we went to China and adopted our little girl. Hannah came into our lives, and I started a new life. And I went into a parish. I had been working at the time in the Diocese of Toronto as the Director of Ministry Resources, which meant that I dealt with all the misconduct from the clergy end of things, and I dealt with all the church closures on the congregational end of things. No wonder I had a little crisis, right? And so with all of that, after 10 years of being in front of many, many judges and many, many court proceedings and many, many College of Bishops meetings, I had come to an end of trying to save the church and work so hard. And so our new life was emerging. And so I went to this parish, and I discovered they were in the same place. They had just built this big church, and they were tired. And they wanted a deeper journey. So here I was, being called into a deeper journey, and so were they. And so we began that journey together. So here's what I discovered around faith formation, because I don't know about you, but I did not hear a whole lot about faith formation in my Anglican background. I heard a lot about liturgy and pastoral care and various outreach ministries, which are extremely important. But I didn't hear a lot about faith formation. And so I started to learn. Here, I'll just share a little bit of what I learned. Faith formation, it turns out, is actually developmental. There are 4 distinct stages that people consistently go through when they grow spiritually. And I'll quickly give you the 4 stages, and you can see where you might put yourself. The first one is called exploring, and in that stage, individuals seem to ask a lot of questions. They don't believe a whole lot, they're just searching. They certainly aren't praying at this point of their journey. So who is God? Is there a God? What's this Jesus all about? And why do you all do the things you do? Now, there can be long, active church people that are in that stage. Doesn't mean that your developmental spiritual work happens automatically or happens with age or with activity. It's an intentionality around being in a relationship with God. Now, something will happen, and there'll be a crisis of some sort, and people will be saying, I either am going to abandon all this because it doesn't make sense, or God, be with me. And they go into the second stage of spiritual development and growth. We call that growing. At that stage, the prayers are often what we would call petitionary. God, please, I need. God, help me. God, thank you, but God, be with those that I love. And then the third stage is called deepening. Prayers at that stage tend to go quiet, and people tend to enter into a more contemplative stage where your will be done, I only ask for strength. The fourth stage is called surrender. And I'm going to be real honest and say I'm waiting till I retire before I even enter any thinking around that stage. That kind of is a commitment that asks a lot. So, when we are engaged in a spiritual journey, if we aren't growing, we're stalled. And the stats would say that a lot of our people are not intentionally growing because they didn't even know they were supposed to or how to. And so one of the things that I would ask is, how would you put yourself in that spiritual continuum? Where would you place yourself? The other thing that I realized is that faith formation is not about church attendance necessarily. Now, I will say this carefully. People experience God. They have spiritual experiences in our liturgies. Matter of fact, in the Anglican Church, we are extremely good at providing a space, a holy space, for people to encounter God. But here's the rub. If you were in a classroom, and the teachers in here will probably want to kind of concur with me on this, if you have a classroom filled with children and they are taught a whole lot of facts, they could probably be at the end of it, write down a lot of it if they were tested, but to incorporate the learning into their lives and integrate, that requires speaking about the learning and drawing the learning and the information and their experience together. When we gather for worship, if you never have a chance to talk about the spiritual experiences you've had, then those experiences will actually sort of just become episodic. They come and they go, but they don't foster growth. And so one of the challenges we as Anglicans are going to have is, how do we help foster growth in the culture and the context that we do our church in? It probably means we need to start to gather a little bit more and allow people to have more comfort and confidence speaking about their faith. And I have to say, that's not something, as an Anglican, that I'm particularly comfortable with. I think that Anglicans hold their spiritual life so privately. I knew more about my parishioners' psychodynamics in their families and in their own pastoral issues than I knew about their relationship with God. In many ways, we would not want to be even caught. We'd be embarrassed if our spouse caught us in prayer. Now, what is that about? So we are the people of God. And so one of the things we're going to need to think about is, how come we're so uncomfortable with the spiritual aspect of our lives? So here's the thing. When people are surveyed in church, 70% will say consistently that they are interested in spiritually growing. If you took that same survey and went into St. Catherine's, something a little bit lower but not much will still say, somewhere between 60 and 70% will say that they are interested in spiritually growing. So what's going on that our people and our community are interested? And I think there's also other issues that are going on in the world around us that we might want to contemplate our role and our place in when it comes to faith formation. I'm just going to read a quote. This is from a lawyer and an environmentalist who was speaking to theological students from Yale. I used to think that the top environmental issues were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these issues. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual transformation. We scientists can't do that. And he then looked to the theological students and said, we need you. And I would say, our society here needs you. These issues are spiritual. What do we have to offer? We're probably going to need to think about how we are growing and how do we share the way in which this community and God's love transforms us so that we can offer that transformational gift to the world, which is aching and groaning in its need for it. So I guess I leave you with these questions. Ask yourself, are you spiritually growing? If you'd like to spiritually grow, would you know what you would do to go and begin that journey? If a new person walked in today and came into St. George's wanting to be on a spiritual journey, could you help them? What resources, many beautiful treasures within our church, could you offer that would help equip them on the journey that God has called them onto and invited them into here? So I think it's fair to say that's my job. The Faith Formation Coordinator is to help you explore these questions. I can't make you grow, that's your journey. But together, we can find resources and ways in which to equip that journey so that the many rich ways that are probably right here that just need to be brought to the surface are attainable to all. So, there is a piece of paper at the back. If you feel in any way that you'd like to learn more about this or to engage a little bit more in a conversation, please put your name there and one of us will be in contact with you. May the Holy Spirit, the Son, God the Father, in the Holy Trinity that is ever in a constant conversation and dance, open itself to you so that you are not initiating prayer, but you are being welcomed in to the ongoing prayer of God's holy love. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.